Hello and welcome, guys, to session 5 of our introduction to the C++ programming language. We're going to be building on that knowledge that you acquired looking at if statements and trying to actually use something that's quite similar. It's called switch cases. Now, this comes quite in handy whenever you need to make decisions or run logic um, based on the evaluation of a single variable. And the best example I can sort of give you is looking back at that program that we wrote, took in a numerical mark and then gave you a grade based on that mark, right? So in that case, we have the singular variable that's controlling all the different scenarios that can come afterwards. Um, and in that scenario, we end up with lots of if statements, right? If you recall, because you have an if statement, if it's an A, if it's a B, and so on. So you end up with if this to that, if this to that, if this to that. And it becomes a bit convoluted and unnecessary when really you only have one variable that you're evaluating. So rather than evaluating that one variable tons of times, we can use switch cases to evaluate it once, and depending on the result of that evaluation or the value of that variable, then you direct it to a number of different outcomes. Okay, so we'll try to do that because it's the best way to understand it is through an actual real life example. So we're going to build a program that takes in a character, and then depending on the actual character entered, it determines if it's a value or not. Okay, so first things first, we have to start thinking about which preprocessors do we need to use, which modules do we need to include, and that would be the IO stream. So include stream. That's because we're dealing with input and output. So the input coming in from the user, and then the output coming out in the as form uh, of a console message. Okay. So next thing is the namespace. Standard. And we get into our main function as always. Okay. So what sort of variables would we need? What sort of data are we interacting with? And in that case, we need a character. So character entered, that's one. And we could also have another one to store the result of our analysis, right? So is vowel. So that's going to be true. If we're going to set that to true if we determine that the character is a vowel, otherwise we'll set that to false. And next we can output a message using the cout object to request that the user enters a character. Please enter a character. Okay. And then we're going to read that data using the cin object and store it in the character entered variable that we previously created. Now we get into the actual switch case statement. My spelling there. So this is when we actually get to make that decision. And we're going to be doing that using a switch case statement. I would be confident that by this point, you should be able to do that with an if statement. But hopefully this will show you another way to do it that might be more efficient in some cases, such as this. So we go in here and we start with switch. And we're going to want to enter here the condition, or basically the variable that we are evaluating. We're going variable for which we care about the value in terms of determining which scenario plays out. So that would be character entered, right? Because depending on which character it is, we evaluate if it's a vowel or not. Then they have two brackets. These two brackets will encapsulate the body of that switch case statement, right? So we're switching cases depending on this variable. I guess that's another way to look at it. And then now we need to start thinking of our cases. So we could literally write out a case for every single character in the alphabet, but that would take ages. And it might be more simple to just write out the cases for vowels. So A, so is B, C, sorry, my mind just carried off there. So is O, okay. And then finally, we can have a default case, and that will basically take place if none of these gets selected. So we have two types of cases. We have cases for vowels and then for non-vowels, okay? And then what we can do is we can actually write out the code that gets executed for each case. So if it's A, its vowel is set to true. If it's B, its vowel is set to true, okay? And so, okay, let's see here. True. And then we have this one here. True. And then for the final one is vowel is set to false. Now, two things with this. The first one is if we actually run this code, we will get an error because this here is a string. We have the quotation, double quotation marks. So this character will not equal a string. We need to be very careful with that. That's why we need to use single quote marks. Just make sure to change that. Anybody who spotted that early on, great job. And the second thing with switch case statements is we need break clauses. If we keep this as is, and for example, the user enters the character U, this code will get run, and also this code, because you have sort of like a cascading effect. The switch statement will look for the first case that matches, and if there's no breaks clause, it will keep on running the code below it. So it's really, really important that when you're thinking about creating a switch case statement, that you're mindful about including break clauses. So we would need to put in here break. Okay. You can think of it sort of like a waterfall. One way to look at it. So now, if this character, for example, is A, it will get to the case A, it will look at what statements it has, and then it will run that statement, but then it will end at that statement. It will not keep going, okay? So let's see what else is left. Next, we need to output the message. So for that, we can use an if statement. So if is vowel is true, then we need to see out is a vowel. Okay. Else see out character is not a vowel. Oh. Now, another way we could write this is, of course, we could include the brackets for the if statements to encapsulate the body. And you can feel free to do that. That helps you visualize the code and understand it a bit better. But it's not going to make a difference at all. So I'm going to get rid of that for simplicity. The other thing is, as well, within the if condition, because is vowel is literally a Boolean data type, we can actually get rid of this here, because by definition, if this condition within the if statement evaluates to true, then it's going to run the rest. If it evaluates to false, then it won't run the rest, and it'll go on to the else line. Um, so by us adding this here, it really is redundant and it's not going to make a difference to the code. You can leave it there if it helps you visualize the code, as I mentioned, and then later on you can start being a bit more concise with it. But for now, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to run the code just to make sure it's working. Okay, so let's try J, which is not a vowel, just in case you're wondering. Let's try A. Now, just to prove to you the concept of cascading within switch statements, I'm going to show you what that looks like visually. So I'm going to output a message here every time A, the case of for A gets called. And I'm going to output a message every time the case for I gets called. And I'm going to get rid of those break statements. So I'm going to get rid of the one for A. Okay, so if we run that and then we enter A, what happens? We actually get A printed out and we get I printed out, just as I had put it in here. So we know that the compiler went first to the case for A, right? Because it was an A that we entered. It set is vowel true, but because we did not have that break statement, it cascaded on to the next case below it, which was I. And it really was, I mean, in this case, it was intentional, but you can see how if you forget to include the breaks, it can become unintentional behavior and it can cause bugs in your program. So hoping that this was helpful in understanding switch case statements. If you do feel like you need additional assistance, we can provide it. Just check out on the platform. We have plans for private tutoring available, not only for C++, but for other languages. So if you do feel like you are stuck and you need some help just moving forward and just getting you going, please get in touch. We'll be more than happy to arrange that for you.